I'm a huge fan. Satchel, I don't know if you were familiar with Sir Ken Robinson, which was a he passed away in 2020, but he was just an unbelievable. I guess he was known as really an international advisor on the subject of education in the arts. And what you were saying earlier about being vulnerable, one of the things I know he always talked about was the thing about creativity. People that are, it's it's willing to be wrong, right? It's putting yourself, and that's where the vulnerability I think comes from, right? You're putting, somebody once told me that design is problem solving. And there, if somebody's coming to you and says, "Hey, Satchel, I want you and your team to design me this great, work environment, office environment, or whatever it is," and there's a lot of ways they give you all the functional needs, but there's a lot of ways you can solve that problem with, creatively. So, and again, I've always wondered, and one of my questions is, if they reject that, they're not rejecting you, even though you put so much of yourself into it. And I think creative people mostly, really do that. But it's I'm rejecting solving the problem that way. And how do you not take that personally, right? When you put so much into that. By the way, is that
Yeah.
something you ever you teach or talk about with your students?
Yeah, Ken Robinson is great. He wrote a book called The Element, and he talks about,
The element,
his
very
notion
cool.
of creativity is being in the element. And um, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book called Flow, and there's lots of different ways of understanding. Rick Rubin just wrote a book about creativity as well, and he kind of thinks of it as a way of being. And Robinson kind of talks about like it's a state, and the challenge is that and to Ken Robinson's ideas, he really focuses on this educational idea, and the K-12 system is focused on getting the right answer. And the first thing that I do with my students is I'm like, okay, in this class, we're going to learn how to fail. We're going to fail early and we're going to fail often. And the students are like, what? And that's because we need to embrace this idea of creativity as a process where we're first kind of defining the problem, we're collecting information, we're using divergent thinking processes and brainstorming and understanding and analyzing, and then we're going to ultimately like come up with a solution. And when we come up with a solution, we're being vulnerable, we share that solution, we develop feedback. And so your client may say, I like this, but this is way off and this is way off. And then we kind of create a revision, and then we redefine the problem, we recollect information. And it's important to understand that being creative is not linear, it's rather cyclical. And every time we go around this process, we're hoping to get closer and closer to the bullseye, so to speak. And
So is it fair to say very rarely do you hit the bullseye on the first attempt?
yeah, and I think it's possible, but we need to create a culture in our organizations so that we don't have to hit the bullseye every time. When we, as makers or designers or artists, we are constantly like planting seeds in a garden. And in order for, not every seed is going to take, so the bullseye is, we got a project, the seed grew, it's beautiful, whatever, but we don't usually plant one seed, we plant multiple seeds. And we need to cultivate that garden so that as projects come, we can slowly pick beautiful roses, and we learn more about our garden as we continue to plant and cultivate. And so organizations need to create a culture of failure. And oftentimes the timelines keep getting tighter and tighter and tighter. Post COVID, they're tighter. And
Right.
and so that means that when the project comes across the designer's table, they have to get closer and closer to the bullseye, because there's not that much room for error, because they're also working on other projects that have tight deadlines.
Right.
And so we were in some previous episodes, we were talking about like the death spiral or something along those lines.
Right.
And
Favorite subject.
and the death spiral that happens within organizations happens inside the design department too. And when the design department is going through a death spiral, we need to try to create space for them to fail, but also to continue to be inspired.
What does that death spiral look like?
Yeah, I was just going to say, what, and is it a culture thing? Is it a behavior thing? It's a, what
Is it project based? How does the death spiral start?
So I think that, if you get a project where it was supposed to be done yesterday, they have no money and they have no idea what they want,
you're talking to, you're talking to some of my old clients is what you're
Yeah, we're talking about the same thing.
We used
and
to be a magnet for that type of partner.
And part of leadership's responsibility is vetting clients to make sure you're going to get leads, but the qualifying of that lead and leadership's ability to protect their staff is vitally important. And
so
to
smart.
keep
That's so true.
to keep the culture of your organization alive. And if you have your employees back, they will reciprocate. And one of the things that the Experience Builders podcast talks about is building experiences for the event industry. And oftentimes as designers and makers, we're thinking about working within an organization. A client comes through the door and we're trying to design an experience for them. What needs to be happening, and Chris, you've alluded to this in previous episodes, is that you as a leader of your organization are creating an experience for not only your customers, but you're also creating an experience for your employees.
Yes.
And so how can we intentionally do that? And what systems can we put in place so that it's not just like, well, I hope this is working. And it needs to be like, really like, what are some things or systems that we can put in to think about the experience of an organization? I don't only, the organization I work within at Bemidji State University, administration needs to be thinking about the faculty experience, but the faculty need to be thinking about the student experience. And every decision we make as professors needs to be focused on challenging and supporting students to help them follow their dreams. It's not to put them through our filters and say, this is what you're going to be at the end of this. It's us creating an experience that helps them self-actualize and ultimately really reach their dreams.